Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're just going to make sure that we get everybody in, and we'll pull the presentation up and get started in a few minutes. Nice to see so many faces. Thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout. Oops. We're going to just keep letting folks in as we get started, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge all of your time. I am Lily Thomas, and I work for the Marin County Community Development Agency, where I oversee our housing and federal grants program. And one of the things that we do is the housing element that we're going to be talking about. I'm also joined tonight by Aline Tanillian, who will introduce herself.
Thank you, Lily. Hi, my name is Aline Tanillian, and I'm a planner with the Housing Division.
And of course, we're also joined by our Spanish interpreter, Miguel. And I'm sorry, I don't know his last name, but thank you for being here, Miguel. Let's go to the next slide, please, Aline. So our agenda for tonight is to give an update on the housing element, talk about the process for selecting potential housing sites, and give you some input about how to provide input on the sites using an online tool that we have called Balancing Act, some office hours we have coming up. I also want to let you know that you can submit questions and comments in the chat, and we'll be collecting that. We'll also be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. We'll go through, but you can go ahead and drop them in if you'd like to do that now. Next slide, please. So our goals are really to inform people about the planning process that we're going through to achieve the county's housing goals and our site selection process, to provide opportunities to share, for participants to share their input on the site selection process. So this is one of the many ways that we're gathering input, including as well as the Balancing Act tool that we'll talk about a little bit more. And just to be clear, our expectation is that we all treat each other with respect. And there may be some different opinions, but we do ask that we treat each other with respect if there's different opinions. So just to get that out there. Next slide, please, Aline. So yeah, we can skip this one. This is if it was the design review board, sorry. So some of you may have already heard some of this, but I'm going to briefly give some updates about what the housing element is and about the RENA, just so that we all are starting from the same place. The housing element is part of the county-wide plan, and it is the one part of the plan that needs to be updated every 8 years. And it also is different in that it is reviewed by the state and has to be certified by them. Our adoption deadline that we're working towards is January of 2023. And the housing element that we're talking about tonight is for the unincorporated areas of the county, and cities and towns are updating their own housing elements, as well as other jurisdictions around the Bay Area and the state. Let's see, next slide, please. The process that governs the number of homes that we need to plan for is called the Regional Housing Need Allocation. And the state provides the region's total share of that. And our region, the governing body in our region is the ABAG, or Association of Bay Area Governments. And of the whole Bay Area, we need to plan for a little over 440,000 new homes. And that's based on the state's projections around job growth, population growth, and a new factor this time around unmet need. And in the whole of the county has about 14,000, and that's including the cities and towns. And the unincorporated county share is about 3,500 new homes, and that's for all of the unincorporated area, for all parts of the unincorporated area. Next slide, please. So as you can see in this slide, this year or this cycle, this planning cycle is a significant increase from what we've had in the past. Our previous allocation was 185 units, and now we're planning for a little over 3,500. So it's a big jump, and it'll be a pretty heavy lift for the county. Will be a challenging process for all of us, especially for those of us who live in the county and are going to have some changes that we'll have to work around to get to that certified housing element. Another thing that you'll see on this slide is that we're really planning for housing at all income levels, from extremely low income to above moderate. Next slide, please. We can see here that even with those significantly low numbers, you can see that we haven't built much housing in the past, both the past planning cycle, but also just in a longer period of time. So most of the homes that have been built are single family homes. So we have not been developing multifamily housing. Very little affordable housing has been developed in that period. So that is definitely an area that the county needs to work on more. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to talk a little bit more about what the site considerations are when we're selecting sites. So we start by looking at what is required by the state. And as the state reviews the sites that are selected and looks at existing uses, realistic potential for redevelopment, they look at the size of the parcel and development density. And the sites that we include must be responsive to these factors. Next slide, please. The state also looks at density as a measure of affordability or as a proxy of affordability. And because of the high cost of land and development in Marin, housing must be built at higher densities in order to be affordable, so that the land costs and development costs can be shared across more units. And that's one of the reasons that density is seen as a proxy for affordability. And housing typically gets more affordable as you move away from single unit homes up into a more dense type of housing. And you can see here that accessory dwelling units can be both in the affordable and kind of moderate income category. And we can talk a little bit more about those later on. Next slide, please. So when we went to our Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission in December and asked for some guidance around how we should go about the site selection process. And they approved these guiding principles as tools that we would be using to help us do kind of the first identification of sites. Okay, sorry, it sounds like there's some problems with my sound. Hopefully that's made it a little better. So those guiding principles included looking at ensuring countywide distribution so that we are providing housing in all of our communities, looking at addressing racial equity and historic patterns of segregation in our communities, encouraging infill and redevelopment opportunities within our existing communities, considering environmental hazards identified in our safety element related to impacts of climate change, leveraging surplus lands, and ensuring a robust public engagement around all of the sites. Next slide, please. And let's see. So the types of housing that the categories that we began with when we were looking at site inventories, we started with more sites and in many cases more units on each of those sites in order to provide some choice and flexibility as we move through this challenging exercise of identifying this many new or zoning for this many new homes. So the proposed list that we're going to talk about a little more is just as a start of it. It's a candidates list, and we'll be narrowing it down as we go through the next community, as we go through these community processes and receive feedback from the community. Let's see, next slide, please. So the preliminary assessment that we did, in addition to the proposed strategies on sites that we talked about, we're looking at constraints to development, which may require changes to our countywide plan, including community plans and other policies that may be inconsistent with new state housing legislation or otherwise constrain housing beyond what's allowed at the state level. We also did a comprehensive analysis of the site. We take into consideration environmental hazards, infrastructure, natural resources, and related factors to help us identify new housing opportunities. Oops, if you can go back just one slide, Aline. I just wanted to point out on this that you can see that we have housing throughout all parts of the unincorporated county. And that was one of the goals that we were working on. Next slide, please. So in addition to the other factors that we considered, our sites have to be realistic. There has to be some realistic capacity assumptions. So we looked at vacant residential land, underutilized residential, and underutilized non-residential. And we need to factor in addition to the other constraints I talked about, what the realistic development happens in our community. So if we typically develop it significantly less than what the density is, we need to factor that in. Next, please. Again, this is a map of our candidate sites that we are now going to pull up the map. If Aline, if you want to switch over, and we're going to share that map, and we'll walk through those different sites that are under consideration in West Marin. So you can see that we have sites throughout the whole community, and the larger sites are more evident when you look at the whole map. We are going around the county giving this same presentation so that people can hear about what sites are in their community and provide us feedback. So let's start with Tamales area. There's a number of sites in the Tamales community, including some school property. There's some sites, there's a church that may have some additional development potential. One thing that I think is important to notice, if it's a commercial site, if it's a religious institution, that the intent is that that housing would be in addition to the current use and not replacing it. So we can see that Tamales actually has a number of sites that are on this consideration. And let's see, let's start with the one over there on Valley and Second, the purple site, and that has up to 6 homes could be under this zoning analysis, could be considered on that site. And then if we move over to the green on the left side there, this site with under our zoning analysis could include up to 13 new homes. And here, that the site across the street from it, 4, and then the Tamales Presbyterian Church, I think, had some development potential that we had added on there. Nope, sorry, wrong. And this is a site, the Bonini property, also a possibility of 6 homes on there. And was this in addition? Nope. So, and that was 6, so 8 total on that site. And let's zoom out. Did we get all of them? Okay, then let's look at the church site. I think that was one of them. Yeah, that had a total of 8. So a variety of places throughout Tamales have some opportunity for development under consideration. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means to property owners. Let's go and just look at the Point Reyes area. These maps are also available on our website, so you can really zoom in and look at them, and then you can see how many homes are under consideration at each of those sites, and you can provide feedback on a site-by-site basis also. So here you can see, if you can see the green one there is the Coast Guard property, which, as you know, Clam and Eden have been selected by the county as the developer and are doing some pre-development work on that now. There's a site just on the corner, right next to the Coast Guard to the north, I guess, of it. Let me test with my directions here, which also has development potential kind of similar to what the Coast Guard property is. So that has been studied with 59 homes. Then if you want to zoom in on that one, Aline, I can't remember that one. Here, this is the Presbyterian church with up to 3 homes in addition to the religious use on there. And what was done with the analysis, it really looked at a parking lot or some underutilized portion of the site that could accommodate additional housing. So again, it's not in it. It's in addition to the existing use. And then what are the purple ones there, Aline, if you want to click on one of those? Oh, that's the red barn, green barn that we're all familiar with there, which looks like we, under the zoning analysis, that it's possible to accommodate 24 homes. And again, this was a zoning analysis. They did the initial review of it, and if sites are selected, there'll be additional analysis and feasibility. Let's just zoom out now and go take a look at Inverness. There's a few small sites in Inverness, mostly along the commercial corridor you can see there. Commercial, right there along, you can see there's a couple of smaller sites there. There's also one neighborhood where there was some houses with larger lots where there was some thought that there could be additional development potential in those areas. And now let's go over to Olema. Also has there's some sites in Olema. You can see the Catholic Church there has some development potential. Some of the little commercial areas have some development potential. And up to 10 units on that site. I can't remember on the church. Let's look at the church site, and then up to 24 this analysis looked at. And let's go to Bolinas, I think it would be our next spot, and then we'll take a look at the San Geronimo Valley after that. And then I want to make sure that we have time to get to your specific questions. So Bolinas, the brown sites that are, you can see the brown site there. When there's a project that has been approved, it has its entitlements, but it hasn't been built, it's called a credit site. So Bolinas Community Land Trust downtown project there, because it had received its entitlements but not been built, is a credit site. And you can see there's a couple, another commercial site down town. By the firehouse, there's up to 7 homes. So there's several little places. Oh, there's somebody who told them that. All right. So there's so several in Bolinas. Then let's go look over at the San Geronimo Valley, and then we'll finish up the presentation so that we can make sure that we get to your questions. So in San Geronimo Valley, there's a couple of sites in kind of our again, the commercial core along Drake. There's a couple of sites there. We also have there's the Presbyterian Church has some development potential there, as well as the golf course around the clubhouse. So the parcel that's around the clubhouse was also studied as having potential of up to 29 homes in addition to the golf course clubhouse that's there now. And I think how many do we have on the Presbyterian Church? Let's just click there and then, and okay, four on the Presbyterian Church. Then let's go over to the bottom of the Tamalpais Union High School District site there, which is just up the road. Sorry. So I'm not seeing, it's the blue site right there. So that's owned by the Tamalpais Union High School District. It's the bottom of the Whites Hill, currently leased to the Flanders Ranch. And there was going to be a high school that was under consideration being built there many years ago, and that has been studied for up to 98 new homes. So as you can see, there's homes around all parts of the county. Let's just zoom out of this and go back to the presentation, Aline. And just a minute, please. So let's go to the next slide, please. So to align with the guiding principles, we've started with 4 different scenarios that included all of the guiding principles and all the other factors that I talked about, but also highlighted one specific issue. So for example, we have a site scenario that ensures countywide distribution. And in that scenario, we would have I think that there's more units, for example, in West Marin than another one, and less in another area, even though there may be more development potential. So with that goal highlighted, it was really to provide housing in as many of our communities as we could. The other site scenario is around highlighting, addressing racial equity and those historic patterns of segregation that we have in our community. And that would be ensuring that our lower income units are planned for communities of opportunity, as the state calls it. So we would be ensuring that there wasn't additional concentration of lower income units in areas of poverty or higher minority population than other parts of the county. Another scenario is encouraging that infill and redevelopment, so really focusing within our existing communities. That might be upzoning some areas that are already where they're already built, that is increasing densities on some of our commercially zoned parcels and on some of our larger single family lots to, again, focus within existing communities. And then the last scenario that we come up with was really around ensuring that we were avoiding as much as possible those sites that had 2 or more environmental hazards that were identified in the safety element. And let's go to the next slide, please. And now we've used those scenarios in this tool that we have that Alina is now going to talk a little bit more about, called Balancing Act, which is one of the ways that you can provide feedback.
Thank you, Lily. So what I'll do is I'll go to our website to show you how to access Balancing Act. And just to back up a step here, Balancing Act is one of the main mechanisms we're using to collect feedback about the sites and scenarios. And Balancing Act is accessible through the Marin County Housing and Safety Elements webpage, and we'll insert the link in the chat in just a moment. You can access the link from the quick links section here, the yellow box. There's a link here for Balancing Act. There's also an icon on the bottom right here for Balancing Act. So on the page, there is an introduction with some information, a demonstration video, some frequently asked questions, and we're also holding virtual office hours this month with one, actually I see a typo here, there's one next Tuesday the 22nd, so that'll be updated. So there's one more next week. There's some high level information here on how to use the tool. So as Lily mentioned, there are 4 scenarios here that take into consideration all the guiding principles, but highlight one in particular. And essentially the goal here is to have users select one or more of the scenarios that they agree with the most. So that'll indicate which avenue to go in terms of a site's recommendation. And within the scenarios themselves, I'm going to pull one up here. So there's an introduction. My screen is dark, so generally this is not this dark. There's also a space for you to enter your postal code if you'd like for us to gather that information. There are most of the sites on the Balancing Act tool. I do want to note that not every single site is on the tool, given the number of sites there are in unincorporated Marin and how large unincorporated Marin is. So the tool itself includes larger sites, sites with a substantial number of units, and sites that may require rezoning. We do have other tools that you can use to insert comments or feedback about every single site that's under consideration, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So the goal of the tool here is to adjust the units as you see fit. So you'll see here at the top of the screen, there's language that indicates that you have a housing plan and a green check mark. And essentially what you would do is review the sites. If there's one in particular where you want to see fewer units, for example, you would decrease, and then you'll notice that the top of the screen turns red, indicating that the balance is off here. And this essentially indicates that you would need to increase the units on one or more sites to maintain the balance of units. So you would then increase and then maintain that balance. I do want to point out that the number of units are different for each scenario. The scenario itself lends to different numbers, and we're going to have a table with all of those numbers published on the site this week. So you can compare the site across the scenarios. The tool also allows you to enter specific comments. So you can specifically say about a particular parcel why you like the site, why you may not like the site, why you have concerns with the site. So you can add that specifically there, and then click submit at the end for the tool to gather the input. So I just want to point out at a high level that the goals of the Balancing Act tool include showing users the trade-offs involved to meet the RHNA number. If units are decreased on a site, we'll have to figure out where to increase that to reach the RHNA goal. The tool also allows us to collect feedback about the scenarios and also collect consistent feedback data about the sites to make then a recommendation using community feedback. But I do want to point out this is one of many ways that we're collecting feedback. The meetings here tonight are another way we're collecting feedback. We're collecting all of the comments, and when we have Q&A, that'll also be recorded and included as well. We are also accepting, of course, emails and voicemails as well with any comments or feedback. And then lastly, I'd like to show you a tool as well here, a housing sites suggestion and feedback map. This allows you to enter additional sites that you may want the county to consider that we have not yet considered that is not on our list. So you can see here, there's a bunch of folks in the community that have already started pinning some sites and entering some comments of why they think that would be a good site. You can also use this tool, as I mentioned, to comment about any of the potential housing sites. So all of the purple sites here are every single candidate housing sites, and you're able to drop a pin and enter comments and feedback about the sites as well through this tool. And lastly, I just want to point out that feedback is being collected through February 28th throughout all the tools. Neely, is there anything else to mention here?
Yeah, I would just say that, there's been some questions about why all of the sites that we've had in other meetings that we've gone, some questions about why all the sites weren't included in Balancing Act. And I don't know if I said, but we have over 150 sites and the tool just doesn't accommodate all of those. And it's important to remember that this is just one of the ways that we're collecting information, and just having people be able to look at what are some of those trade-offs. If I would like to say, I don't think there should be any housing that's built on land that is currently undeveloped, for example. If that is my priority, then I need to say, okay, let's put some more housing at a higher density in some of our existing communities, and let's do higher density on commercial. So it's just experiencing some of those trade-offs, and it's one of the tools. It's not the only way that we're collecting information. We can, you can do emails and voicemails, and you can comment on the map, or you can provide feedback tonight. So there's many different ways, and that's one of the tools that is being used. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the chat, and we're going to go through, and Aline's going to read them out. I'm going to try to answer them unless it's something that she is going to answer, and then we'll go to questions. And we can just do the raise hand feature. And if we don't have the answer to your question, we will ask you to put your email in the chat, and we'll get back to you. Great.
Okay, so I'll start by reading out the chat questions. So starting with Ariane's question, I'm just going to read it verbatim. So I've noticed you've suggested 2 sites in Bolinas that are completely unsuitable for development, one due to wetland constraints and the other, which is a public park created with private funding. There are at least 3 other sites that were suggested that are not suitable and do not seem to have been considered. Can you speak to why this is?
Yeah, so I would have to look at that specific site, but I would say that, this was a zoning analysis that was done. And this is the high level first brush of it. And one of the, sorry, my dog is barking just a second. Sorry about that little commercial break. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so this started this high level zoning analysis. If there's anything wrong or there's information which is not accurate, this is one of the reasons that we're going around and making sure that we ground truth it, that we get your feedback. And, people are providing us thoughts about why a site is not the right site, or why there's sites that should be included. So we ask that you provide that to us. If you would like to give us those parcel addresses or APNs, or you can either do it with email or you can do it on the map, and let us know that those are not appropriate for development. That's exactly the type of information that we're hoping to get. So I'm also going to just let you know that I'm going to try to go quickly, because I know that there's a lot of questions, and then people may want to answer their own in person, and I want to make sure that we cover all of them. So sorry if I'm too brief. So go ahead, Aline.
Thanks, Haley. Just the next one is around the probability of actual development and whether that's incorporated into the guiding principles and the site process.
So it wasn't one of the specific guiding principles, but it is something that we have to evaluate, because that's one of the requirements that the state has. So in previous housing elements, it was a much more kind of a loose process where you could just put a site on the list. But now the state has a much more strenuous review where you really need to show that development potential is possible within that planning period. So yes, feasibility is considered and is part of the analysis that we have to do in order for that site to be considered by the state as adequate to meet our housing needs.
Thanks, Haley. There's the next few set of questions that relate to whether infrastructure is under consideration when making these decisions, specifically water and traffic. And one specifically raises the water issues of a rapidly changing climate and the impact on water tables and increased intensities over time.
Sorry, I'm just going to admit these people who are trying to come into the meeting. So that is a very good question that has been coming up, and something that, I've been thinking a lot about in the face of drought. Like, how are we going to be planning for all of these new homes? And so there's a few things. So we asked the state about that. Because we started this when we were before we had that rainy month, when we were in really deep drought. not that we're not still in it, but it was even more deep drought. And we asked the state about it, and they said there's no provisions in the law that says that you do not have to meet your housing need if if you're in a drought. The planning period is for an 8-year planning cycle, so they say that you have a longer period to plan for, and if you don't have adequate water, you need to have a program in your housing element that's going to address that. So, for example, you could have a program that would look at increasing storage capacity. You could have something that looked at something that I've been thinking a lot about is a recycled water. Our county does a really bad job of recycling water, and much of the majority of the water, the fresh water that we have, is used for landscaping. And so, there's other communities that do a lot better job on using recycled water. So that is something that could be looked at, and looking at some of the infrastructure dollars to help improve that. So that's another way that we could look at it. But yes, it's a challenge. I live in West Marin. I get my water from the Nicosia Reservoir. When it was just a mud puddle, it was something that's definitely at the forefront of my mind. So that is it's again something that's going to make it more challenging for us as we're planning for housing in this cycle, with more homes than we've ever had to plan for, and facing the repercussions of climate change. Also, I think somebody asked about traffic within that constraint, and sorry, that was a long answer about water, but I think it's something that many of us are thinking about. And traffic, again, is analyzed in our environmental review document that we will do once our sites are selected. Let's go to the next question, please.
Great, thanks, Haley. So the next question is related to what happens when the actual owner of the property doesn't want to develop on the site.
Good question. So if this is a zoning requirement that the county has, we don't develop housing, but we can say, like, the county's job is to provide the zoning capacity, and a property owner would have the option of developing or not developing a site. So it's really up to the property owner whether they develop on that site, but this would give them the choice and the ability to do that if they opted to do that. But they're not required. There's no requirement that they would have to develop.
Great, thanks, Haley. And another question around whether the sites are matched up with the general expectation for employment in the area, or if the expectation is going to be for people to be commuting from West Marin to the 101.
No, the idea really is that you would provide housing in the communities for people who work in that community. That is definitely the goal. We don't always do that. Like, you're not required to work and live in the same community. We have a choice. We have housing choice and employment choice, but the goal really is to allow people to have housing where they can live and work in the same community. And that is definitely a goal. There's you need to make sure that the housing that you're providing matches the needs in that community. So if you have a workforce that is primarily lower income, then that community, would need more lower income housing. Of course, the county is not responsible and doesn't actually develop the housing. We can do the zoning, which also has to be consistent with what the state requirements are. But, that would be the ideal, but we don't always have control over that.
So there's a question that wants a little bit of clarification around the mandate to create new housing and where it's coming from and whether it's an actual mandate.
Okay, I'm going to answer that question, but before I do, I know that people are still dropping questions in. You can also just hold your questions, and after we go through the ones in the chat, we'll go to you if you would like to answer them if you'd like to ask them in person, just with a raise hand, just so that you have that as an option. So the mandate for developing a housing plan in the housing element is in state law. And the number of homes are derived, as I said, through a formula that the state looks at new job growth, new population growth, and existing unmet need, and then assigns the task to the Association of Bay Area Governments, or the local regional government entity, who has the task of deciding how many units go to each jurisdiction. The Board of Supervisors did appeal that number, and specifically asked that we reduce the number of above market rate homes and do more lower income and less above moderate or above market rate homes. And that appeal was not sustained. It was denied. So that is the mandate. If the county does not comply with and doesn't adopt a certified housing element, we're at risk of losing dollars for housing, as well as transportation and road dollars. And we could be subject to a lawsuit and litigation. And the history of those lawsuits, really the jurisdiction typically loses and is required to adopt a housing element and pay the legal fees of the entity that sues them.
A question around, kind of similar to what you previously answered in some ways, around what happens with the site after it's selected, specifically with regards to short-term rentals and Airbnbs. How can that be curbed at all, if at all?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So right now we're really focused on sites, and we're talking about sites, and a lot of the attention in the housing element is focused around sites, but the housing element also includes programs and policies. And we are, opened, and we did a needs assessment where we heard about needs. We talked to the community about that. And one of the things that we heard loudly and clearly in West Marin was the impact of short-term rentals on both the housing stock and just the nature of those communities. So, based on that, we likely would have a program that would look at short-term rentals in our community. And there's other, for example, in Carmel, they have limited them. So there's a range of ways that could be addressed. And that is the most likely way of addressing short-term rentals. On any new housing that's built, if it's an accessory dwelling unit, you can limit the use of those as short-term rentals. But I think really looking at a more comprehensive program on short-term rentals and the impact of our communities in West Marin is a likely program that would be in our housing element.
Thanks, Lily. I'm checking the time. I'm noticing we have 15 minutes and a lot of text questions. Should we maybe pause and take questions? Maybe we can respond to these in a follow-up. What do you think is the best way to proceed?
I'm available to stay a little longer. So let's go through a few more of them and then get a sense if you would like us to, if you have a question that is not in the chat that you'd like to answer, if you want to just raise your hand so we can get a sense of how many of those, if you want to use the little raise hand feature. And let's keep going through and answer a couple more questions while people let us know if there's additional ones that they haven't posed in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Lily. There was a question around, I think when we were going over the map, we didn't really delve into Stinson and Weir Beach. So there's a question about Stinson and Weir and the consideration there for sites.
Okay, I think that there's, sorry. I don't think that we have any in Muir Beach, if I'm remembering, but we do have a couple in the commercial core of Stinson. So yes, there's a couple there. And we can, it's on the map and we'll drop that in the chat also, so that link is there.
And then there's another one here. There's some concern that this process is really focused on numbers and not focused on appropriate or realistic locations for development. What was the process the consultants used to create this potential site inventory? It does not appear that the countywide plan, community plans, and the county climate action plan was reviewed.
So all of those were reviewed, and we found that we had enough zoning we had sites that were adequately zoned to meet our above moderate income housing. So we already had enough housing, enough sites, enough parcels that could meet our above moderate income housing. However, we do not have enough to zoning in place with all of those existing documents to provide for our lower and our moderate income housing. So with that in mind, in order for us to have a certified housing element, we are going to have to make amendments to those documents, most likely, as I mentioned. So that could include changes to the countywide plan, to community plans, for example, a number of our community plans have policies and that are inconsistent with a number of the new state housing legislation, the package of housing legislation. And so community plans may have to be amended. And so, yes, those documents, although have been reviewed and may have to be amended in order for the county to get a certified housing element.
Someone is asking as a resident what they can do to push back on a particular site, and they're citing the clubhouse, the golf course clubhouse. They mentioned there's no precedent for any housing done in the area in this way, and they cite some eyesore concerns. So they just want to know how to submit comments. So I would want to reiterate the Balancing Act tool and the map and email are best ways to share that feedback with us.
In addition, we're taking the comments we received tonight. We'll take the chat. We'll save that, and we're recording the meeting. So all of this is part of that process. So that has been noted, and your comment has been noted.
Great. The next one is: will development be allowed within the 100-foot stream side or stream conservation area?
There's no changes that are proposed. That is not something that we're proposing. So no, that is a countywide policy that would be respected, and so that no change to that policy.
How can the county support affordable housing with streamlining and reduced timelines?
So interestingly, that's one of the things that the state has really focused on. And there's a number of programs that the state has said that, if we're not meeting our housing goals, then streamlining kicks in. So if our property has a certain percentage of affordable homes included in it, then they can take advantage of streamlining. However, that said, many of those policies are not in effect in the coastal zone. And so the coastal zone, as any of you who live in that area, that's another layer of review that is just another, in addition to the other pieces of review that have to happen in the county, that's another one. So a number of those streamlining policies at the state level are not applicable in the coastal zone. That, however, sites that are in the housing element, it does one of the points in the housing element is that if you propose, if a site is eventually included in the housing element, and a developer comes in with a site that's consistent with what's in the housing element, it does really speed up that development process. And as the county is really required to approve it if it's consistent with what's in the housing element, unless there's some other really significant environmental challenges that are identified that weren't known at that time.
There's a question here around whether we have population increase estimates by community and in percent. They cite Olima in particular, and that it seems slated for a big percent increase. Is the county ensuring this is consistent with existing community plans? And they cite adding impervious surfaces and pollution to the San Geronimo Valley seems at cross purposes to all the money and effort being spent on salmon restoration.
So there isn't a specific allocation by community. So we're not looking at, there wasn't a, like, we're looking at this much growth in each community. And you'll see that kind of the different scenarios that we've looked at. If you look at countywide distribution, then there's more units in some parts of the county. If you look at focusing on infill and redevelopment, then they're really more focused within the cores of our villages and along the 101 corridor. So those are some of the trade-offs that are going to have to be considered. Any kind of specific environmental things around that were mentioned around in the San Geronimo Valley or other parts of the county. If a site is included, there would be an environmental review. We'll be doing a whole CEQA review as part of our housing element for the sites that are selected. At this point, as I said, this is a preliminary site list, and it's much more than what we need. And so we're starting with this bigger list and then identifying where are the places where there's support for housing and where should, I'm just going to mute this person, sorry. And so, you know, that I lost my train of thought, but I think I was saying that, you know, those are some of the trade-offs that will have to be made, but the core values of environmental protection are not, you know, those are not going to be changed if those policies are within our countywide plan, such as the stream side setback.
So it's noted here that 25% of the sites, the candidate draft sites, are going to West Marin. Since the bulk of people in West Marin, this means you are increasing commuting. Any plans being taken to increase public transit options that make public transit reliable and a valid mode of getting around Marin and to and from over the hill?
So if sites are included, that transportation is part of the infrastructure that would need to be included. So if there was a significant number of sites, or more accurately, if there was a significant number of units proposed in any community, that looking at transit and increasing transit access would absolutely be part of that, developing the infrastructure that was needed to support that housing.
Is there an established or approved minimum square footage per unit? Smaller could be more affordable and visually fitting in some locations. Are you currently giving full credit to properties with second or third units or property zoned single family to meet the ABAG mandate? Starting there may lower the number you seek for unincorporated Marin.
So the minimum square that we're at this point, the zoning exercise that we do doesn't get into the level of detail of what size a home could be or would be that was proposed on a site. We don't get into that level of detail. That would really be at the point that a developer proposed a project or a property owner proposed a project. So there is statewide, you know, there's building code that require that's where the minimum size of a home is. I am interested in looking at ways that we can, you know, encourage smaller homes, and that again could be a program or a policy within our housing element, is how can we look at smaller homes rather than, you know, the pattern of development in our county is large single family homes that are, you know, 4,000, 3,500 square feet. That's what the typical home that's developed in our county. So what are some ways that we could incentivize and encourage smaller homes? And I forget what the last part of that question was, Elaine. Did I miss that?
The last part was, I think, specifically around second and third units on sites.
I think that that may be a reference to Senate Bill 9, which is a legislation that was passed recently that allows homeowners to develop a duplex or additional units on their sites or on their parcels, and those can really be used from the state's perspective to look at our market rate housing. The density isn't enough for that proxy for affordability, and we have enough zoning to meet our above market rate. So we're not proposing any rezoning to meet the above market rate. So, you know, we didn't need to rely on that. And at this point, given that it's so new, it's really hard to say what the development potential there is, because we have to look at what the pattern is going to be. So it's a new legislation that we'll be learning about over the next few years and how that plays out.
So there's a question here citing, so according to Meg, the consultant staff, they were unfamiliar with the county and the sites. They reviewed the sites potential based on online data from county zoning and tax rolls. This was stated in the prior housing element too. So just maybe we can clarify that. Yeah.
So MIT used the information that we have in our GIS layers, and Aline might be able to talk more about that, but that's that data that they used. It's the same data that our planners use when they're evaluating the development on a site. And then staff also reviewed the proposed list so that we could say, that doesn't make sense, or that's way too many on that site. We're familiar with it. So we had a variety of our staff members. And then the next layer that we're doing now is doing that with you all and with people throughout the county. I just want to note that it looks like we only have one person who has their hand raised to ask a question that hasn't been addressed. So we'll make sure that we get there. Let's keep going on the questions.
Do a couple more here.
Yeah.
How is development that is not included in this list considered? There are hundreds of lots in West Marin that could accommodate an ADU, but this is not included in the plan.
So accessory dwelling units, ADUs, second units are part of the plan. And so what we'll do is we can count those second units based on our development patterns in the past. So if we had, for example, if we had permitted 20 years or 20 units per year in the past planning cycle, then we could project out 20 units per year and then take that off of our total housing number. So if we had, if we could plan for 200 units, for example, we would take it off of the 3569 that we have, and then we just have to provide sites for that difference. So they have been factored in. We think that it is one way that we can meet our housing needs. It's not an answer for everybody. You know, it works for smaller households, not for larger households, but it is one way that we are addressing housing needs, and we'll be looking at second units as one of the options that we're looking at.
There's a great question here around that most of the undeveloped areas have evacuation issues, and will the roads be widened?
So evacuation issues is one of the, looking at evacuation, fire hazards is one of the things that we are evaluating. The county's also updating its safety element at the same time. And what the safety element is an analysis of how the county can respond to climate change impacts like flooding, like sea level rise, and like fire hazards. So if there is additional housing on a site, looking at emergency access routes would absolutely be one of the factors that we would evaluate and make sure that there was safety for the folks who were moving there.
There's a question here around wanting to see developers held to a high standard of energy code compliance. Can the municipal building code be amended to require gray water, solar, and other energy efficient standards?
So there's state standards that are fairly rigorous, and I think that those, those are definitely impact for any new development. Those requirements are in place. I'm less for solar. I'm less familiar about gray water, but that will take that down. And that's definitely a good thing for us to evaluate and to be considered as a program in the housing element.
There's a question here that would like some clarification around how we're going to respond to the comments both here and on Balancing Act.
So we will be compiling all of the feedback that we hear, all of the comments we get tonight. Those will be included in a recommendation that we make to the board. We're going to present the board and planning commission with a couple of different site options that incorporate all of the comments. So if we hear about, this community feels like housing shouldn't be in this area because of flooding or because of traffic, but here's a better place that they think would be appropriate for housing, that type of information will be included. If there's ideas about programs and policies, those also will be considered. And so we're getting information from a lot of different ways. Balancing Act is one of them. Comments tonight, these are recorded, and we take them the comments from the chat and all of those as part of the feedback that we'll be compiling and sharing with the board when we present our recommendation on sites.
There's a question here around the site suggestions map and whether we're going to take into consideration the volume of input on specific sites into consideration.
Yes, we would.
Then next question here around how will this be affordable for people? Will they be renters? Suppose a service worker here earns $50,000 a year. Affordable rent should be 25 to 30% of that. Is this the ballpark amount of rent that will be required? Or will rent be according to market rate rent? Right now, that is $3,000 a month and it's not affordable housing.
Exactly. So looking at ways, so we have to plan for housing at all income levels, including extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And one of the things that's in my regular job that Aline and I do when we're not doing housing element is really looking at ways that we can encourage and facilitate affordable housing. The board has a housing trust fund. We work with some of our developers around it, and those programs and policies that we talked about will be intended to encourage and help ensure that we can get affordable housing developed that meets the needs of people in the community. And what we've heard, we hear about the need for housing in West Marin that can serve people who work in the tourist industry, for people who work in local schools, people who work in the agricultural industry. Those are all kind of typical things that we hear about in West Marin, as well as options for that missing middle, that moderate income folks. So yes, those are all the types of housing that need to be considered in the housing element.
Question here around that the county just adopted a new core commercial zoning throughout West Marin. How will this process affect that?
So if it's in the LCP, then of course any changes that we were making through the housing element would have to be considered also through the local coastal plan amendment. So that would also have to be part of any process that was done, or any changes that were made have to also go through that process.
Trying to find new questions so that you can offer new information.
Let's go to MA. If you want to go ahead while she's looking at some new questions. MA, you have your hand up. If you'd like to unmute, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Andy Flick, and I live in Lagunitas, and I own 5 parcels and own a design build firm, and have worked with the county for 15 years. And the reason why there's been hardly any development is because it is so difficult to work in the county, and it costs so much to go through your existing processes. And now, what I'm seeing is that you guys are gonna, rezone, push this thing through, and all of a sudden we're going to have all these houses, specifically on the golf course. And so my question is not, how is this going to affect regular people? Like, are you going to loosen up development for regular folks? Because I've been shut down on my properties for second units, for ducks, for sheep, for parking, and so how are you going to make the process fair for people who already live here and want to do things with their properties that have not been selected in this process?
Thanks for your question, Andy. I would say that, if there are specific issues, one of the things that we have to do in the housing element, in addition to identify the sites, is we do a constraints analysis. So we have to say, like, what policies that we have in the county are constraining development. And if it was, for example, height, your height limits are too low. It's making it so that you can't feasibly develop housing. It's really too expensive to do that. Then we would have to consider whether that was something that we would amend. So looking at programs and policies is part of the housing element, and looking at ways that we may be constraining development. For example, we have an inclusionary policy, which is fairly stringent compared to many other communities, and we're evaluating whether that, the requirement in the inclusionary is too strict in making it so that some of our smaller developments are not happening because of our inclusionary requirements. Also, I would say that some of the new state legislation addresses those things. So the increased accessibility of having second units or ADUs on your property. A lot of the constraints have been taken away by the state. And then the new legislation that we mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 9, where there's a lot, it's pretty permissive around allowing people to subdivide or add another unit on their property. So let's go back to your questions, Aline, that you have, if there's any other ones you wanted. I also want to do a time check and let people know that if we don't get to all of your questions, we will follow up with them.
I also noticed, Phil, you have your hand up as well. Maybe we should allow Phil to answer.
Okay, let's do Phil, and then we'll go to the
Yeah.
next question that you have, because there's other people who've been waiting
Yeah.
with those questions. Go ahead, Phil, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for hosting this meeting tonight. I wanted to follow up on a comment you made earlier about amending the community plans, which many of us have worked, many years to develop. I'm looking at one in particular. One of the main ones is to retain the existing village character and heritage of the valley and preserve the valley's social and economic diversity. In particular, the development at the bottom of White Hill, which would increase Woodacre's housing stock by close to 20% and would create really a separate, almost another new village. I'm curious as to how you might amend the community plan to allow something so separate and so large, where people would have to cross a high-speed highway or a tunnel underneath, or put in a traffic light in order to cross safely. How could you go back and actually amend a community plan to allow a development like that?
Yeah, so I think that we'd have to look at community plans. We have to make sure that they are consistent with the state requirements around, ensuring that there's access to developing, that people can develop housing, that there isn't undue constraints in it. And that's what I meant about amending a community plan. When you look at the site that is owned by the Tamalpais Union High School District, of course, it would be up to them about if they wanted to do development. They may want to develop housing for their teachers, for staff in local schools. And that's the type of development that would likely happen. The state has passed a number of new laws to kind of encourage and facilitate school districts to develop housing. There's some new funding that's available for them. And, we know that many of our schools have experienced declining enrollment. And so looking at making sure that schools, that's one of the advantages of adding additional family housing in our communities is kind of beefing up those schools and making sure that there's enough students for them to stay viable. But yes, the community plans, the amendments that I would talk about really would be about if there's anything that's inconsistent with the new state legislation. And then the other piece is there's language often in our community plans that say that they would override a countywide plan policy. And really that's the place that we might have to look at amending that language. So if the language says the countywide plan, the community plan is more specific, and so that would override the countywide plan, that would be an example of something that we may have to amend in order to be able to plan for the housing that we need to get a certified housing element. Aline, was there other questions in the chat that we didn't get to that were not answered or different than?
There are a few more. one around whether the county is making any effort to actually help fund the acquisition or development of these housing sites.
So the county has a number of funding sources available. They have a county housing trust that's a little over $10 million in that. We have a new source that came through. It's called Aline knows it, but anyway, that's another funding source that we're getting from the state that matches our dollars. In West Marin specifically, there's the Measure W that is a tax on short-term rentals, that half of those funds are used for community housing. So there's a variety of ways that the county funds affordable housing, in addition to some federal dollars that we get through community development block grant and home dollars. So yes, there's a range of ways that the county supports affordable housing. Of course, it's never enough, as it's a really expensive place to develop and hard to get all of that funding together.
You've touched on this a bit around whether fire, safety, water issues, and traffic implications are going to be considered. This person also says from what they understand, these are not truly low income home offerings. They'll be market rate eventually. Can you speak to these two issues? So the question around deed restriction came up again later on.
So the constraints around traffic and fire and water would be evaluated in our environmental review if a site is selected. So those are definitely taken into consideration. And if a home is developed that is affordable with county funds, or is developed with state funding, there are deed restrictions. The county typically requires a deed restriction of in perpetuity and or 55 years. So there are typically long-term, if it's considered affordable housing, there are long-term deed restrictions that ensure that they stay affordable over time.
There's another question around SB 9. So around the number of units that are available to be built on the site because of that law, in addition to ADU legislation that also allows for additional units. So this person is asking whether there's going to be any challenge, or if we're going to challenge the state on this.
The legislation has been passed. The county has no plans to challenge or to litigate that. The legislation is in place. We are looking at passing an ordinance. We'll have to pass the local ordinance to implement it, and that hasn't been done yet. So I don't have a lot of details, but our current planning staff are drafting that ordinance, and it would go in front of the Board of Supervisors for their consideration.
One around whether there's a requirement to set aside residences for the chronically homeless or severely mentally ill as Victory Village and Project Home Key.
So the housing element needs to ensure that there is zoning that can allow homeless shelters, but there isn't a specific requirement for permanent supportive housing, although it is one of the special needs that we need to talk about in our needs analysis and demonstrate how we're going to address that and ensure that we have, a variety of housing needs to serve folks at all levels of our community. So, but nothing kind of that specific as the questioner had asked.
Question around whether the recommendation is going to be available for review prior to going to the board.
Yes, it will. It will be on our website as soon as that recommendation is complete. We have meetings throughout this week, and we'll be gathering information through the end of the month. And so we'll have a staff report that will go out first, and then the recommendation will go out afterwards so that we can make sure that we're incorporating everybody's feedback.
Question around whether or how historical buildings are going to be treated. They noticed a number of historical buildings on the list, like the Red Green Barn and the Grandy building, etc.
So if there was development on a site that was considered historic, that would have to be considered. We'd have to go through the California Office of Historic Preservation if that site was if additional homes are going to be evaluated. So no changes compared to what the current policy is.
And while you did touch on this earlier, there are a number of comments here and questions around the impact of short-term rentals on the rental market and how that can be curbed again.
Yeah, yes, we hear this loudly and clearly every time we're in West Marin. I'm aware of it myself. I see this increasing impact in my own community, and I would say that this is exactly the type of thing that we would consider as a policy or a program about, how we can address the impacts of short-term rentals, and that it's taking away housing stock that is typically available to people in their communities and the impact that they're having on communities. So yes, that would likely be a program in the housing element.
And lastly here, who will be developing these properties? How are the developers selected? Is it a public process? And will the projects go through a design review process where the community can comment on the design and et cetera?
So there is, our job again is to just set the table, and we would provide the zoning and the programs and policies that kind of encourage and facilitate housing, but we're not putting out requests for proposals. We're not requiring that those sites are developed. So if a developer or a property owner decided that they wanted to pursue development, then they would do that. If it's affordable, then they would have there's some incentives, fee waivers, et cetera, offered by the county. And there was the last part of that question I think I might have missed.
Around I think you touched on this, the design review process.
Oh, the design review process. Sorry. The county's also in the we are about to adopt new objective design standards. And so those are used in some cases. The state has done this streamlined review that they say if there's a certain percentage of affordable units, then you can't go through the regular kind of discretionary review process. So, depending on the project, it would go through our regular discretionary review and people could comment on the design, et cetera. Or if it met a certain threshold of affordability and went that route, then you would use these design review standards, these objective design standards that we're going to adopt, and you'll be able to comment and provide feedback on those before they're adopted. They're being drafted currently. So, depending on which of those scenarios, there could be more or less community input and feedback on them.
And so there was a question earlier on, just a clarification around the timeline for us collecting feedback. And the person had a concern around the short timeline for feedback through the end of February.
Do you want to talk about the timeline, and then I'll talk about the shortness of it?
Yeah. So we are collecting feedback through the end of this month. These tools have been available for some time, but we do understand that given the date of the meeting and the time afterwards, it's a bit tight. But I do want to reiterate that this is a draft list. This is not the final list. The considerations will be brought forward. Lily, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So the timeline is definitely tight. We typically would have started our housing element a lot sooner than we did. We were impacted by COVID, and our team was really deeply involved in doing COVID response and addressing impacts to our community from the pandemic. And so our housing element timeline has been compressed because of that. We do need to have a sites list, an initial sites list for the environmental review to start. And so I do appreciate that this has been a shorter period than we typically would like to have done, but we do have and and this is the reality of the world, unfortunately, that we're in right now, that it has been compressed because of that. And I would say that a difference that we're doing this time is we normally would have done a lot of this analysis on our own, that we would have figured out, and we'd say, here's the sites that we think are the best ones. And then we would have gone to the board, gotten feedback, then gone to you. And we've kind of flipped it around where we said, let's start with the whole long list where we think it's possible to accommodate with more units than we think. And then let's go out and get feedback. And then we're going to go and share that with the board and make a recommendation. So we don't have a recommendation right now. And we will after we're done with this process, but we did kind of flip it around. I've been saying it's like a math problem that we're showing all of our work instead of just showing the answer like we typically would. So, and we're, doing a much more opportunities for you all and other community members to be involved in providing feedback on it.
Thank you, Lily. There's just one question here around community land trust and the fact that there are 2 in West Marin, and there's discussion around a countywide CLT and how could a county CLT contribute to the development of affordable housing in other communities.
So what we have members of our community land trust here, I believe, on the meeting tonight, and they are definitely one of the most effective ways of providing housing, especially in a small community where there's all these additional constraints around the coastal zone, et cetera, where they can kind of respond to really a hyper local situation. Traditionally, land trusts have been used to address that, the patterns of segregation where Black families and people of color have been shut out of the housing market. And so in many other communities around the country, they're used as a home ownership tool to really address those patterns of segregation. And land trusts can be one of those tools to do it. They can also be a developer of affordable housing. So when you look at those sites that are designated to or identified as possibilities for affordable housing, then a land trust could be one of the entities that could develop housing to meet the local needs that were identified in that community.
Great. I think that's all the technical questions that I see. There's a question here around whether there will be any possibility for an in-person public meeting.
So at this point, we have not scheduled any in-person meetings. I think that the Board of Supervisors meetings at the one that's scheduled for March 1st and 15th are also remote, and that may change just as the public health situation changes. It looks like the mask mandate is being relaxed, so things are in flux at this point. We're doing them all like this. We do have the option that if we, on all of our materials and our website, that if people request them, we will try to accommodate. We haven't at this point received requests, but if there is a request for accommodation to do in person, then we will, we'll do our best to accommodate that and meet people where they need to. My goal is really to make sure that everybody in the unincorporated county is aware of what we're doing, of this kind of Herculean task that we have in front of us to plan for all of this housing, that they see where it is that we're planning and that they're able to provide feedback on one of the many tools or ways that we're doing it so that we can share that information. So those are our goals that we're, and we're out here every night doing these. This is one of the tools, as well as all the other online tools that Aline mentioned. So I think that we're going to try to wrap up by 7:30. I do want to make sure that if there's any other questions that we didn't answer, that we will do that via email. I think everybody who had their hand up, who hadn't asked a question, has been done. Has been addressed. Oh, there's one more. Let's answer Kevin's question. Kevin Levin, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, we'll
Yeah,
do our
it's-
best to answer.
It's Ken Levin.
Oh, Ken, sorry.
I questioned, thank you for vowing to answer all the questions that you didn't get to in the chat. How will you make us all aware of the answers? I don't want you to just answer my question. I want to know the answers to everybody's question.
Well, let's see, Aline, we could
We have
post, we can
everyone.
answer them and we can post them on our website, or we could email them out. We have emails. So one of those ways. What's your suggestion, Aline?
We can do both, quite honestly. So we'll do both. I
Great.
was going to say that I think we've answered all the questions. We'll review again, but I just want to offer this opportunity. If anyone has a question that they've put in the chat that hasn't been addressed, please go ahead and raise your hand. Let's address that.
Yeah, I had another question that wasn't addressed. What's going to happen? I understand that you need to come up with a plan to satisfy SB 9 and the state. That's by the end of this year, by the beginning of 2023. What's the deadline for actually building these units? How is that going to follow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our requirement is that we adopt a housing element that's a certifiable, that gets certified by the state. And then on an annual basis, we're required to report on our progress in meeting both our housing needs and implementing those programs and policies that I talked about. And if we are not successful, then the state has those streamlining laws which come into effect. So if the county is not successful in kind of meeting its share, if you divide those units across an 8-year cycle, you know, in year 2, if we're not successful, 3, 4 going forward, then we would be subject to legislation called Senate Bill 35, which means that basically that if a project comes in and has a certain level of affordability, that it has to be approved at the ministerial level. And that means that it doesn't go through the Planning Commission, Design Review Board, or not, that doesn't go through the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors hearings, et cetera, that would happen with a typical discretionary review. So that is really the tool that they use around kind of the carrot and the stick around getting people to approve the housing. Of course, the county doesn't develop housing. We only can do the permitting side of it. So, you know, to some extent, if we are not, you know, our hands could be tied if development proposals are not coming through. All right, so I think we've gotten the questions. Looked like one, was there another question that just came in?
One around septic.
Septic. First of all, how did we have a West Marin conversation about housing and we didn't talk about septic for an hour and a half? That is a first time ever. So septic obviously is a significant constraint in West Marin and a barrier to adding new housing often. One thing that we're doing right now is we have some planning dollars from the state, and we are looking at what are other coastal communities doing? Is there anyone else who has more, you know, who has some policies that we could look at, that we could consider in when we're looking at different septic systems that could be approved. And so that is one of the programs that we're looking at now. And, you know, if you have ideas about policies or programs around septic, that is the type of thing that we would want to include in the housing element.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I see.
So somebody else just came in. We're going to answer that last one, and then I'm probably going to lose my voice if I keep talking. But I'm really happy that we had so many people. This was a really great turnout. Remember that if you have other questions that come up, you can reach out to us. Aline will put the email in the chat and a link to the website. I think somebody asked for a link to the website about Balancing Act. And And while you're doing that,
More so a comment around the need, based on the potential for future ministerial development, the selection of sites needs to be completed carefully and with as much community input and feedback as possible. So very pertinent comment.
thank you for that comment. All right. Thanks, West Marin. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for all of your feedback and your comments and your care for your community. We really appreciate you being here, your feedback, and we look forward to hearing more from you as we develop a draft sites list. We're incorporating this feedback. We have 2 meetings coming up at the Board of Supervisors on March 1st and March 5th. Both of those are scheduled for 5 p.m. They'll be this format again. Someday we'll get away from this, but this is what we're doing for this time, and hope to see many of you there. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, everyone.